It is Thursday. Is it Thursday? Thursday the 20th. This is Barbie. I hope everyone is doing well. We're going to have a little hangout here. We have Nathan Oakley with us to make sure I keep this straight. And we have my friend Steven. So I'm really, really excited about this. I'm going to check really quickly to see who is in chat. Let's see. I think Patricia is here. Arwen is here. Hello, Patricia. Hey, Arwen. Sean Dolan. Hey, how's it going? I think you're spamming me, dude. Martin. Political hillbilly. Hello. So, yes, back to business. So, I've got some guests here. I'm a little nervous, so give me a break, guys. But I want to introduce you guys to my friend Steven. So say hey, Steven.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so I've known Steven for a while. Steven is a flat earther, but it's more than that. I've been talking about this for a while, about my involvement in this shape of the world being more. It's so much more than just flat earth. And this is somebody that can kind of help me drive that home. Well, he will definitely help drive that home. So I hope you guys appreciate this. Oh, here go my dogs. Sorry. But I'm going to let Steven talk by asking him a question really, really quickly about what helped you to discover that the world was not what you'd been told?
Okay, big questions. That way that you can ask. You can say a few words, but say an awful lot. I'll just say hello to everyone in the chat and whatnot. I am from Scotland. If anyone has any problem understanding anything that I say, Barbie can translate. I'll try and speak slowly, clearly, and concisely so that people can understand. I can understand that the accent is a little bit rough, and we'll try to kind of beat our way through the problems. So how did I come to the flat Earth revelation? For me, it started a way back. I think everyone started probably with the moon landings. That way, everybody saw that documentary. A funny thing happened in the way to the moon. Bart Sabrell, I think, produced that. So most people started there, or they learned about the Fed or whatever. So I had learned about the periphery conspiracy theories, but I was really looking at mainstream science. That way I was convinced we hadn't went to the moon, but I was like everybody else. There's still, we've got the ISS and there's the International Space Station. The idea hadn't entered into my imagination that they'd been faking anything. It wasn't, I just was nowhere near that level of revelation yet. But I was looking at mainstream science. I wasn't watching mainstream programs on Discovery Channel or anything. I was watching Leonard Susskind, Stanford University lectures, and I was looking at the world's like Alan Dunn and Alan Guth, sorry, and these guys who profess to be the most intelligent people, the Scientologists. These are the grand priests of Scientology. And these are the guys that were telling everybody about black holes, and they were talking quantum physics, and they were talking about the AI revolution and singularity. Very, very attractive prospects. That way they love to draw people in with a good story. And there's always a hook. There's some hook to drag people into these stories, these paradigms that they create. But I was also looking at the electric universe theory. And there's a guy in the electric universe theory. There's the whole lot of them all together. They're really pointing at Einstein and saying this science is wrong, it's impossible, it can't work. But they're very, very quick to dismiss black holes. Stephen Carruthers is one of the main proponents of this. And Stephen Carruthers will be right there. He shouts like a maniac that black holes don't exist and all of this other stuff. However, it's because he simply didn't understand what a black hole was. Science, it's not science, that Hollywood has presented black holes as being a thing, when in reality it's something completely different. That any vortices is technically a black hole, depending on your size. Imagine you're a spider in a bathtub and somebody fills the bathtub with water, and then someone pulls the plug. Well, that vortex that's created when you pull the plug is a black hole. Technically, it's sucking in. If you imagine that the water in the bathtub is all space, you can call it the ether, call it whatever you like. So all of the ether gets sucked down into the plug hole, and the spider goes with it. You know, they'd call it the gravitational attraction, and it's actually perfectly applicable. You know, that term is perfectly applicable when you're talking about a vortex in that context. If you're talking about a tornado, well, you can imagine how the wind is flowing and that it does pull things in towards it, but it also spits them back out, depending on how close they are and what's really going on. There's a lot of dynamic processes going on there. So, looking at this idea, Stephen Carruthers had put the idea that science was fake and Einstein was a liar and black holes were fake, but yet I still had this proof that I understood what a black hole really was. But it was more than that. The electric universe is about electromagnetism. So if you take a large neodymium magnet and you just put it in front of a television, depending on which side of the magnet you use, you'll produce a black hole in the static electricity. So if you imagine that this static electricity, again, is allegorical for the ether, you'll put this magnet there and it creates a void. It's a literal black hole. The ether doesn't penetrate that area, and it becomes a visual. You can literally see this effect, and so it's a black hole. So there's multiple different examples of what a black hole is. Anybody who knows anything about, you know, building a basic motor with electromagnetism knows that all you need is a copper wire and a magnet. You can prove that the magnetic field spins. This is very, very easy to prove. And so all of this was kind of coming together, and I was making this realization that the world was almost certainly electromagnetic, but I couldn't understand how the world itself could have a magnetic field that was greater than the sun, and I couldn't understand how a black hole at the center of the galaxy wasn't sucking us in. I couldn't understand any of it. None of it was making sense until I finally came to the realization that there's no such thing as a South Pole. That any, even a black hole is considered to have, as much as it's theoretical, they would call it a white hole, but it would still be a polar opposite. You know, it's just a simple, you know, concept that you'd have a black hole at the opposite side of the white.
If I can clarify what you're saying, is that you're talking about a monopole?
Because yes, absolutely monopoles. Monopoles are theoretical in physics. They say they're theoretical. However, anyone who has paid any attention to what magnetism actually does, they know that it's just a matter of perspective. It's the same thing that you observe in the sky. When you look up at the moon from the northern hemisphere, you know, you'll see that the moon appear from that direction, and so it will appear to be, you know, the rabbit will appear to be the right way up, and from the southern hemisphere, the rabbit will appear to be the opposite way around. And you can literally reproduce this by putting a picture on your own ceiling. It's just that simple. It's just about your geographical location relative to the position of the thing that you're looking at. It's not complex. It's just really, really simple. Sorry, what was the actual question? I kind of lost myself there explaining something else.
No, you did really well, because I was saying that what you're saying literally is that We have been taught that there is a North Pole.
Oh,
I
right,
call it the North Hole. I coined it the North Hole just in case anyone wants to know. And a South Pole. But what you're saying is that we're probably dealing with a monopole, which means one pole.
well,
Okay.
you know, that's ambiguous. Here's the bottom line: nobody knows. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know what a monopole is. You know, all I know is what I can observe. Well, compass points in one direction and it never points anywhere else. You know, that way. That's the way that it works. From that, you can eliminate the impossible. Whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must therefore be the truth. The compass doesn't point anywhere else except in this direction. That's not entirely true. There are geographical locations. These are called Veil vortices. You should look this up. I should have actually linked this.
Can you state that again? What vortices?
They're called Veil vortices. VILE vortices, just standard vortices. If you look up the Veil vortices, I don't know if you want to maybe do that just now, Nathan, and maybe just show there is a map on Wikipedia. This is profound. It shows 12 geographical locations. There's actually 13 if you count the pole itself. These 13 geographical locations are all at exact intervals. You talk about the ley lines, you know, where these, you know, why did they build the pyramids at the 33rd degree, you know, on the Giza Plateau? Well, if you look where the Veil vortices are, you'll find that there's an intersection there and that it's part of the ley lines and it's almost certainly connected. And that you will find that if you travel on a boat somewhere, you'll notice this, that there's shipping lanes. Is this the picture here? Can I just click on this? So there you can see it. There's the Veil vortices there. You'll notice especially if you're in North America, you can see that just off the south there, just from Texas or whatever, it's Florida, there's the Wang of America. Just off there is the Bermuda Triangle. So you find that the Bermuda Triangle is smack right in the middle of this area of massive geomagnetic energy. But that's not the only thing.
Just want to check, is it actually sharing? Have you put the box on me, Barbie, so that the audience can see what we're talking about?
Is it been selected? Can everyone see this?
So we'll find out. I know they can see it when I'm talking now, but I just didn't know if it was there while you were talking, because otherwise you're talking and they can't see it. But hopefully Barbie's put a little box around me and they can see it while you're talking. Yeah, I think we're all good. So off you go.
Okay, so this is the Veil vortices. I think if this is people just seeing this now, so this is the Veil vortices. These are geographical locations that are set at very, very specific intervals. Again, we're looking at the map as it is just now. If we convert this to, you know, a Gleason's map or whatever map you're particularly happy with, you know, you'll see this clearly indicates the positions of the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer. This will show you, you know, the sun is clearly moving in between 2 points in the sky, and as you know, they'll say that there's a tilt or it's doing this or it's doing that. But the sun's moving simply backwards and forwards between these two areas, which if you're looking at the celestial sphere, then you're talking about the tropics of Capricorn and Cancer. And each of these locations here, you know, people tell tales about each of these locations, but only two of them are really well known: the Bermuda Triangle and the Devil's Triangle. So, you know, if you go and research this a little bit more, you'll find that there's a whole lot of information. You know, how valuable this is to the overall, you know, the research of flat Earth. But I think there's maybe one or two people that have picked up on this, but really not many. So we're looking again at the wrong map. And if we look at Antarctica, we see that there's a geographical, you know, position there. If we are imagining again that there is no South Pole. There still has to be a point of, you would call it the pinch point, the point that the magnetic energy must flow back. It has to find a way to flow back. That's the way that that any clock would work. It can't just go one way and end somewhere. It must come back. Everyone's seen the infinity symbols, and this is allegorical for this. And so all that I can say is that from all that I can determine, that it would be fair to say, if the model was true, if the flat Earth were true, then it's quite likely that the magnetic energies of the world might end, it might end somewhere in the south. What that actually means is anybody's guess. Maybe that's why it's so cold. It's quite clear that you wouldn't see, the way that I like to describe it, they talk about the Goldilocks zone. So this is another example of how mainstream science tells the truth. Well, the Goldilocks zone in mainstream science is described as being that place that Earth can exist, that's close enough to the sun that it's not too cold and not too far away that it freezes. And so Earth does have a Goldilocks zone, and that it's quite clear if the sun is traversing over the top of us, just as it appears, that if you go too far away from the sun, it's obviously going to get really, really cold. Well, how cold does it get? Is that what the termination of the magnetic field is? The energy simply becomes so diffuse. Diffusion of energy is part of relativity, actually. The relativity theory is something quite interesting. That's quite interesting. I can now see the chat, which is quite horrible. Yeah, so the relativity theory is kind of part of this idea that there's diffusion of energy, and that the farther away that you get from an energy source, the warmer that it gets. So that's really...
So if I were to work myself into the next question, and this is something that I've been kind of trying to put out there to people, and the flat earth community is very, very difficult, but would it be fair to say that science is being honest? We are just not seeing those truths.
No, they're definitely not being honest. But if anybody watched Subtle Infinity? Have you guys seen Subtle Infinity? Sorry, I can't hear you. I'm not thinking of that.
Getting quite a lot of feedback from Steve, Barbie, just so you know. What was your question, Steve? Have you seen the infinity symbol? Was that your question?
No, I was waiting for Barbie to finish what she was actually saying there. I don't know what had happened. Are you still there, Barbie? What were you saying? I can't hear you. I don't know if you're actually speaking.
What I was saying is that science is not like totally lying. I'm not sure that I'm expressing this question appropriately when I say that when we look at science and the evidence that is provided to us, the truth is in there. They just make it very, very difficult for us to pull that out. Would you agree? And if you agree, can you elaborate on what I'm saying?
So I was just making reference to Subtle Infinity. I don't know if you guys have watched Subtle Infinity.
No, it's a new one on me. New one on me. Not heard of it.
So Subtle Infinity's got a really good beat on this. There's an awful lot of allegory there. And when you're looking at science, if you're looking at mainstream science, you're kind of nodding your head there. Can you hear me? All right, Barbie? Is everything all right? Okay. Technical difficulties. I don't know what's happening. Okay, so if you're looking at science, and if you're looking at it from that perspective, that the people who are operating science are, well, everything's allegory. Everything's a kind of subtle metaphor. A lot of it tends to be played down, but it's quite clear that there's a very very theological, very spiritual aspect to the types of science that they come up with. You know, they have to follow certain rules, and that the people who are creating this stuff are almost always Jesuits. It's something that's impossible. It's impossible to separate ourselves away from this. It's again, it'd be foolish to make a blanket statement about the Jesuits. I've got a problem with that, but it's quite clear that when the shoe fits, the shoe fits. There's so much evidence that there's quite a monolithic conspiracy going on. JFK used the term monolithic conspiracy, really, I think, when he made that famous speech. But at the top of mainstream science, there is Jesuits, and it's difficult to know. At some point, we have to guess a lot about what their intentions for the metaphor and the allegory that they're implanting into new scientific ideas is really for. As far as I'm concerned, and this doesn't go down well, especially in America. I know that some people are really desperately all about the Bible, but the bottom line is that the Bible must be scrutinized. Test all things. That includes the Bible. It's not acceptable to just say the word of the Bible is going to cure all our problems, because if that were true, you know, that we wouldn't be in this shit just now. So looking at the science and looking at the allegory, your question really is, go back to the actual question. They are telling the truth, but I'd alluded to this before the conversation, the chat actually started, that just like Ben Kenobi says in Star Wars, it's not cool to reference movies, you know, when you're trying to make a point about reality. But it's a perfectly sensible quote that everything that you come to believe does depend greatly upon your own point of view. And that when they are telling these allegorical tales, a really obvious one is the Big Bang, and that creation happens in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. Well, if you look at the birthing process from conception, you'll find that, well, you could call it a big bang. You know, when your parents, that night of conception is a big bang, I suppose, if you want to talk about it like that, because the sperm enters the egg. I only hear stories, you know, from the mainstream academic community about what happens when the sperm enters the egg. I hear stories that there's an explosion of genetic matter. So you could call that metaphorically a big bang. And it's quite clear that they knew about this process a long time ago. But if you look at when the egg is released, it flows through the fallopian tubes. And then on 6 days after it's released, it settles into the wall of the uterus. And from there, it develops into a child. So on the 6th day, it gets to its destination, it makes the world, and on the 7th day, it's resting in the uterus. So there's an allegory, a basic, very simple allegory that is very easy to understand if you're coming at it from the right place. If you're looking at it from the wrong angle, of course you're going to miss the really important stuff. But that's just one example. If you take,
I love that. I love it. I've got to. I said I wouldn't interrupt, but I love that so much because I've been trying to phrase that for ages, because I've been posing a question to people, which is, why do you assume there's a creator? Because lots of people in our community assume there's a creator, and when I question myself about it, I go through what you've just essentially said. Can you mute a sec, Bob? So yeah, which is to say, you ask yourself, how did I come into existence? How did the person before me come into existence? How did that chicken come into existence? Yeah. And you always go through the same process. There is reproduction. Yeah? Well, that reproduction is not, you could call it is a creation, but it's still a reproduction. It's not the initial making of the egg from nothing. That we never see and we never experience.
That's what you've just described there. What you've just described was, well, when they talk about the expanding universe as recreation, that's what they mean. The metaphor of an expanding universe. let's take the idea of the sun being a nuclear furnace, and we've got to understand what life is. That primarily, we've almost referenced the chicken and the egg problem. This is the problem in evolution, that we don't know where it started. It doesn't make any sense. We can follow a logical thought process and we get to what we regard as the edge of human knowledge, that place that we can't penetrate. We just don't know. And we can't even admit to ourselves that we can't even understand it. However, we can observe the system that we're in, and we can define certain rules, and from that we could perhaps postulate or speculate as to what might be beyond. I kind of lost my thought. All right, so the expanding universe. So that is the concept. The concept is that we are in a nuclear furnace. Linkin Park have got a great song. In fact, no, it's not Linkin Park. Who is it? It's Lovers on the Sun. Who is it? We might as well be lovers on the sun. I don't mean to sing. I know that was terrible. So Lovers on the Sun.
Smash Mouth. Are you talking Smash Mouth now, Stephen?
No, it's okay. It doesn't matter who sings that song. Anyway, Lovers on the Sun. So the idea is that, let's imagine we're literally on the surface of the sun. Just for argument's sake, I actually believe that we're standing on the event horizon, which is a solid surface of a black hole, and what you guys are referring to, the northern polar vortex, is some kind of black hole that we're misinterpreting. Imagine being inside an Xbox and discovering the power source that's coming into the Xbox, and thinking that you've discovered the ether, the source of God, when in actual fact you've discovered a plug socket. I mean, there's strange revolutions to be had here. But this idea, anyway, that we could, if you imagined for a moment that you were on the surface of a sun, this is a thought experiment. So we're on the surface of the sun, but we're still able to be alive. We're literally exploding at every moment. We die at every moment. For some reason, we exist with time. The arrow of time, they refer to the arrow of time as being this linear motion of the universe that we can't, it's one of the primal laws. You can't go back in time. We can talk about it. We can create fanciful ideas regarding these things, but we can't go back in time. And so the arrow of time leads us forward. The idea of that leads you on to other scientific ideas like entropy. This is where my black hole idea had come into this, is they say if you get pulled into a black hole, you suffer spaghettification. I should have made a Mobius look to demonstrate this. People imagine that cellular mitosis, I will connect this all in a second. People imagine that cellular mitosis happens when one cell recreates itself and then splits and divides. But that's not how this works. That's not how cellular mitosis works at all. Cellular mitosis works like this, like chains. That's where you get genetic strands of DNA. So one recreates the next, but it's automatically connected to the next. And so this process over time, you're just connecting more and more and more. That's you growing old. You're getting older and you're producing more and more and more links to the chain. Well, that's spaghettification. It's quite clear that that's that process. You imagine what your body is, that we clearly die. Our body is fighting the full power of the universe. The universe is trying to tear us to shreds at every moment. And if it's not doing that, why are you dying? Why is there cellular mitosis going on? Why are any of those things observable at all? It creates this idea of a nuclear furnace. I think that's where that metaphor comes from. And, it'd be easy for people to get caught into what I'm saying without understanding the allegory. You have to overlay these ideas over the top of other ideas. You imagine that the people who come up with these ideas were an awful lot more clever than us. And here's one or two people coming together.
I'm going to interrupt you again. I'm really sorry, but you said about Lovers on the Sun. It's David Gettier, but I've got the lyrics up now, and you say these people are clever, and music is absolutely one of the most overused subliminal methods to program you with ideas. The amount of blow programming in music is unreal. But I've talked a little bit just so that I've got the lyrics staying up for a long enough time so that if anyone wanted to read their way through them, I'll just scroll down just so they actually appear on this Hangout. So if anyone did want to read the lyrics to Lovers on the Sun, you can actually see them all there. So there you go.
And that's
Look at
something
those lyrics here, they're quite...
I'm gonna mention to you, Stephen. We talked about this earlier, but if you're going to generate this machine of deception, what kind of people would you actually need to be proactive in spreading these stories? Because we've talked about this many times, and at the end of the day, they're stories, but who exactly would be like the targeted people to do all this stuff?
Who would be the foot soldiers, you mean? Who would be like
Yes.
yeah, like, well, obviously they've got the Masons. The bottom line is that everyone gravitates towards power. You know, if there's a secret, people will gravitate towards it. I think other people have answered this really well. You know, money is a fantastic incentive. The idea that you can have authority over other people and that you know something that they don't. I've observed firsthand sigil magic. I know how to use it. I know how to manipulate people. It's simple mentalism. Darren Brown does this on a daily basis. You know, it's really funny that you'll see Darren Brown and he'll be presented to you in British television, and you'll be sitting there watching this thinking it's entertainment, never realising that this Kabbalistic regime of individuals had finessed this programming, this psychological indoctrination. It is witchcraft. In old terminology, there's no other way to define it. The ability to manipulate the thinking of one person's mind and make them create an entire reality that doesn't exist is witchcraft. There's no doubt about it. We've gussied it up and we now call it mentalism. We now call it fucking psychology, psychiatry, and whatever else. This is the study of human behavior. This is the pinnacle of how to manipulate and how to shape the world. If you imagine what magic is, once you understand that magic is real, and then you understand it's not sparks coming out of people's fingers, it's not bolts of lightning out of arseholes, it's thinking, it's really knowledge, then you've got something. Then you say, how do I use this? What happens if, because there's the good wizards and there's bad wizards, it would be fucking foolhardy to imagine that there are people out there who aren't aware of this and how to use this.
So let me ask you
understanding.
something. I'm going to interrupt you because you jumped to like one of our earlier things we were talking about with the magic. And I made several videos about this in the past. Like we're talking a year ago, I was talking about this magic, and we're all magicians as well. And
so
wow,
who do
I
you
got
want?
hacked down for it. I mean, people
We'll
got really upset. But wait, let me ask my question.
No, you actually asked the question, which I never got to answer, but I'll answer it really quickly. So who do you want in these positions? People who are intelligent enough to understand the model. That's it. That's who you pick. And you just have to identify them. I guess school aptitude tests might throw up a few clues as to who might be most suitable, who applies for the right jobs, you know? There'll be ways to find out.
So when we look at it like this magic, again, Stephen is saying, it's not this magic where I go, oh, and bolts of lightning shoot out of my freaking hand. It's the magic of me being able to affect you with my words. And this is important because people can actually do this. And I've made videos saying, this is what's being done to us, but we have the same ability ourselves. And I see a few YouTubers actually employing this with you brought it up with the Simon Says stuff. We don't have to mention names, but explain the difference between...
Simon Says?
Yes, you know I did.
Should I explain what Simon Says is all about?
You should explain what Simon Says is all about, and then explain the difference between being able to use this kind of magic in a positive way to make change, and what it is to actually observe it being used in a negative way, which is what we're observing.
Right, so just rephrase that and give me that whole question again, just so that I can, you know,
Okay, so
get the points.
we'll start from that tail end of what I was saying. When we talk about this kind of magic, it's not all negative. In other words, there can be a positive reaction to using this kind of magic. But my question is, how do people recognize when there's like this negative magic going on? We call it magic, but you're going to explain it. And then positively, how do we use it? And then what is Simon Says? You got me?
Okay, so that was a few questions there actually. Right, so how to use the magic and recognize the difference between righteous action and immoral action? Fuck knows. See if you can, you know, that's been the problem throughout all human history. Here's what I can figure out: the Jews keep being kicked out of countries all across the world, and it's because they keep doing this. That they keep doing this all the time. I think they genuinely believe that it's their job because we keep falling asleep. You know, we're all proud of being awake now. We remember being sleeping. You know, we all experienced that period when we were ignorant. And I'm not saying that we've come so much further that we're still not ignorant. You know, there's plenty of room for ignorance, but we're a lot more humble. We don't hold those egos, the old egos that held true to the lies. Have those the bricks that make the wall of the ego have fallen down, and people who now believe in flat Earth. And so you're a lot more, even though you're more guarded, you're profoundly more guarded. You finally have discernment, but you are open. You know, I can say the world might be round, you know, but I'm a flat earther. I can say that. And I can go into other areas and say things with certain degrees of confidence. How do you fucking tell the wheat from the chaff? Oh my God. That, you know, this is the age-old problem. It really is an age-old problem. That I genuinely believe that people who hold true to the old gods, I think they genuinely believe that they have got a mission to wake us back up. What if someone doesn't wake us up? What if that's what they keep doing? They keep lying to us. They can manipulate history. I've got no idea if there was 2,000 years of history. I don't know if any of that was true. I can't. At some point, I had to have a mental dump. I know that sounds, you know, I mentally went back to factory setting. You know, I had to go, nope, all rejected, because everything that I knew was false. And so it made me a liar to even open my mouth. Every time that I opened my mouth, I was a liar. And so I had to reject everything that I said was true. Everything had to go. There was, how long would it take you to sort through the files? So rather than sorting through the files, you go total dump. And that's it, back to factory default. And then from there, you know, you can use your discernment, and then you reach out and you pull that bit of knowledge in and you say, that is acceptable. That I've tested that knowledge and I am fucking sure, I'll bet my balls on this one. And you pull individual bits in. And when I look at myself now, I'm like a child. I've got about 50 bits of knowledge, maybe 70 bits of knowledge, you know, that I can trust. There's not much beyond that. That's scary. I can understand why people struggle. You know, you're faced with this dilemma. So we'll just break this down. And you know, I'm really good at this. I'm good at visualization, and I can literally daydream whenever I like. This is the moment that I realized the Earth was flat. I had a revelation. People talk about this. Enoch was taken up to the high mountain, and the only person I told in the world was Barbie. Barbie was the only person who knew, and this was years ago. And I so inside myself, this sounds stupid. Just go with me for a little minute. Bear with me, people. It's okay. The sky's not falling on anyone. So I experienced this moment, and it was like, Americans might not know what a tub of Smarties is. But it was like my mind, my entire conscious being was a tub of Smarties. And I'd been staring at the outside of it my entire life, thinking that I knew what it was. And then all of a sudden it broke open and I saw everything that was inside it. And everything just made sense. Everything, that was my moment of revelation. That's when the idea of no South Pole became, we're on a flat earth. Just, for me, that was absolutely profound. How did we get to this talking point? I was meant to write something down.
I'm going to steer you back in where I want you.
Steer me back in.
So,
Okay.
because you said such a mouthful there, and I get it. But Simon Says, explain that to people.
Whatever the point there was, sorry for not getting to the point. I digress. I'm really bad for this. Simon Says. The moment that my mind exploded, I'm not joking, it was like I had been programmed, and the words Simon Says, I'd learned enough by that point. You know, that way, the words had no meaning for me up until this point. But maybe I described this as being the puzzle piece. You know, you put that final puzzle piece in, and even though you don't have the full picture, it's enough, and you're able to guess the catchphrase. I've got it. I've got the catchphrase. I understand. And it was that moment. And so Simon Says, I'm not going to say, I'm not interested in bringing names and giving people undue credit. But it was a certain individual who was responsible for this, who's in the flat earth community, that said these words. And he said it in a way that you'd only say it if you were performing some sort of magic on people. Very, very subtle. Very, very implied, something that you'd never have noticed in a million years. And this phrase came to me, Simon Says. And by this point, I realised that Mount Sinai. And so Psi in science, and psychology, and all of these mind fucking phenomenon. And so I started to look at the base of language, and I thought, right, psi and I. So you've got psychological something in your eye. So Mount Sinai, what happened at Mount Sinai? Well, the 10 Commandments come down from Mount Sinai. And so upon religious indoctrination, I quickly discovered that through the use of psi symbols, if you look at the mainstream scientific community's symbols, they're called the symbols of psi. SI, just SI, not PSI or the obvious version of what psi is. So we'll go back to psi man. Well, the psi man is the psychological man. And let's look at where you learn the game of psi man says. You learn it in school. Who the fuck put that game in school? The psi man says, do this or don't do that. I don't even know how to play that game. I never understood the game. Did anyone understand the game?
Yeah, I can explain Simon Says. Simon says
sit
down. So if Simon says sit down, you sit down. If I just say sit down, then you don't sit down. You don't do anything unless Simon says do it.
So that was the that is the primal explanation, the only explanation that you'd possibly need. So there's the psi man, this guy who gets in your head. This is where we're talking about, you know, sigil magic. We were talking about magic and how this is used and what the psi man is. Well, the psi man is the man who gets in your head. And so that's one of the very basic levels of indoctrination, because it happens in school. And so right from the very, very start, Simon Says is a game, and it's the words, it's the two letters together. It's the implication of SI, psi, and it's simply cymatics, you know, it's the mind, it's the stuff that works in here. And every time that you see a word that refers to that idea. And so this word, Simon Says, woke me up to this strange wordplay that seemed to be going on. You know, that there was, like the word Israel. it's Is, so it's Isis. Then it's Is Ra, so it's Ra, the sun god. So it's Isis, the female god, Ra, the male god, and then El, which means deity. So you've got God, 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 male god, female god, and then El, which again the Israelis imagine, or the Jews imagine, that they're the chosen people. They actually imagine that they are God, you know, and I can understand this. I've said this to myself. I've had this conversation in my own head. You know, there's only one voice I hear, and it's mine. You know, I'm not fucking conversing with the Almighty or anything. I believe in God. That's a personal thing, and I'm not shooting that out for the world overly much. You know, but back to the Psi-Man anyway. So that's what the Psi-Man really is. Psi-Man is the introduction for children from the school age to Psi, and this is sigil magic, which is S-I, sigil. And this bleeds on to the whole area of psychological manipulation, which you could call magic. That's how it relates to the magic question and what the Psi-Man really is.
And that's kind of what I was leading to, is like the importance of this, because you pointed a video out to me about someone who is actually doing this.
Yep.
And I had watched this video. I'm going to be fair, guys, and say I'd watched this guy's video 15 times.
Can I just ask me, why aren't you mentioning his name? I know exactly who you're talking about.
It's Math Powerland.
You should
okay, I'm just going to put it out there. It's Math Powerland.
You shouldn't put that stuff out there, because people will go looking for this stuff. And the bottom,
yeah,
even if they're aware
kind
of it, this creates witch hunts. This stuff creates witch hunts. There's different levels to understanding how psychology works. You know, that way, that even though most people imagine, again, that they've got a good beat on things, people think that they're awake and stuff. Every time that you watch, I had a YouTube channel. I was called the Black Hole Matrix. I put out quite a few videos, and I just stopped. I was not interested at some point in producing any content for a flat Earth community who was giving way to the Hegelian dialect. Right now, we're all engaged in nothing. We're sitting here having a conversation when there's a world out there that needs something done. And the real world problems are not fixed by people who are sitting in their arse, you know, having a conversation on YouTube. The real world problems are fixed by people who go out there and stop being on YouTube. We're really comfortable. Talking about comfort. Comfort is your number one hook. It's the thing that you won't give up. If you won't give up your comfort, how are people ever going to live? I don't know if you guys know about the monetary system. How anyone gets to the flat Earth and doesn't know where money comes from, I don't know. Do you guys know about this stuff? I've been called, what's the name?
Yeah, I'll explain to you if you want me to.
Yeah,
hi, I'm Martin Leitker, Flat Earth British. It's very nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
What are your names? Sorry.
It's Stephen. How's it going?
Hi, Stephen. It's lovely to meet you. Nathan, my brother. Always an honour to see my brother. Blessing to see you always. You lift my heart. And Barbie, I flipping love you. As you know. Am I coming through okay, guys, at all?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Oh, good. Excellent. How are you, Barbie, my dear? Are you okay?
I am doing awesome, Martin. Thank you.
How's your baby bird?
I have no idea. He kind of took off. He spent a day in my car, and then that was it. I didn't see him again.
Yeah, he's taking flights. But cute.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Did we lose Stephen or what?
Well, sorry, Stephen.
We all need to be a bit more.
So
We all need to be a bit more vigilant with the mute button because there's just so much feedback.
Somebody's got their watch page on. I haven't got nothing on. Only this.
It's feedback. Just need to stay on mute if you're not talking. I mean, I just want to add something before we go off on track and start chit chatting amongst ourselves. So we were talking about sort of And another aspect that I want to bring it on to before we go off this subject was another part of the education system, which is English, or language would probably be a better way of saying it. And you're learning about spells and spelling and grammar while you're learning how to communicate with people. And I've always boiled this down to something quite simplistic, which is just getting a cup of tea out of somebody. You know, you just ask somebody for a cup of tea and a cup of tea appears, which is kind of like a magic trick if you want to look at it in a way, but it's just communication. It's just learning that's at a very, very simplistic level, obviously, but this is what we're talking about, these simple ideas that have been expanded upon.
Can I just say a word on the English language? You do know it's a really recent language. The language, as you know, was Latin for thousands of years, the Roman tongue, which is now extinct, but there's no reason why it's become extinct. Dig into it. The English, when the St. James Bible came along, what it did is it married all British dialect across the land. You could be in Gloucestershire, travel one county east, and you would be a complete foreign. Nobody would then be able to understand one word you said. So with the St. James's Bible, everybody in each of their parishes got to read the same narrative, and aka everyone got to speak the same Elizabethan English. Before then, it was what I call an Allegory language, which means the language they would have used back in the 12th, 13th century during the Vatican Code, which is no similarity to English now. It's Anglo-Saxon crossed with Norman, so it's a French, German, Celtic dialect with no English. That's a complete new language. And they worked out, as you said, with the spells, with our vocation and our vibration of our voice, invoke different things. They worked this out pretty early on, which is why I believe the English language evolved in the way it did, from 500 years of nothing to probably outside of China, the most prevalent language on Earth, and soon to be the New World Order language of Earth. And the New World Order, by the way, is here. If anyone thinks we're waiting for it and it's on the way, I'm sorry, guys. It's here.
I don't know about you guys, but I didn't understand a word of that. Can anyone speak Welsh?
Yeah, I got it.
You're Scottish, aren't you?
Yeah, I got you. No, you're right.
I'm just messing with you, Martin.
I know you are.
I'd add to that.
Americans can understand me. You can understand me.
Yeah, that's it. I'd add a little bit to that, though. And anybody who's familiar with George Orwell in 1984 will be familiar with the concept of doublespeak. And if you look at what was going on in 1984, you realise that the government, you know, you just refer to them as they were utilising this simplistic, dumbed down version of the language that didn't convey the full concept, you know, that was missing grammatical syntax, or, you know, just very, very important aspects of the language which they just simply didn't teach them. And so they dumbed this down and they called it doublespeak. But it was based on real world stuff that during the Second World War, that George Orwell worked as a radio presenter for the British broadcasting company.
He was also intelligence. He was a double agent. He was American. He was Secret Service, as in the guy who wrote the New World Order and Doors to Our Perception. Aldous Huxley was also Secret Service. There's got to be a similarity here. They're the insiders, aren't they?
Yeah, they're clearly insiders. And so when he wrote that story, and you were saying the New World Order is already here, and that was self-evident, even in Orwell's time. He wasn't saying that the world was going to be like this in 1984. He already knew that people were using doublespeak.
How could you know about the teleprompter? Right, I know the television was invented by Joan Logie Beard in the 40s, but it didn't. Nobody's seen it in their living rooms till the early 50s. This guy, right, knew all about television because he put the teleprompter, which is our internet, guys, on our wall. Winston, get up, start jogging, where they're dictating your existence from the off. Now,
yeah, I'd say that's the iPad. I wouldn't say it was the television.
No,
or
the iPad. I meant anyway.
literally an iPad on the wall in 1984.
Yeah. How could you have known? How could when you get people like Arthur C. Clarke, who writes a novel in 1945, one I've got, by the way, I've got dozens of his novels, where he makes the inception of the communication satellite. It's only an idea, mind, yeah. Less than 20 years later, this thing's up there. Basically, me and my Nathan and myself have seen the Russian satellite Sputnik. We've actually seen it ourselves. It's not that impressive, but they say it's still going around there, beep, 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 in lower centric orbit. It's not. I don't want to go into too much to digging into the backstories of everything, because obviously it's time consuming. We all know the backstories, don't we, guys? But this Stephen, I was listening to you. That's why I joined, Stephen. You had some very, very good, valid points. To do with magic, there is such a thing as magic, I'm afraid. I've seen it, I've witnessed it, and I'm practicing it. But it's not magic as in abracadabra, I will make it last. You mentioned sparks between the fingers. I've manifested sparks between the fingers without the help of psychedelics. By homing my cheek.
I've actually done that once. I know that the human body can pick up static electricity.
It was witnessed.
It's not okay to call that magic. I can,
No.
I can measure that. I can measure that effect. I can put that static on my body, and it's not me that's manifesting that electricity. It's external effects.
Have you ever walked across your carpet in a pair of slippers and had an explosion from static?
So we're not zapping people. That you can definitely create a static build-up on your body. You can see this with nylon. You can put stuff into your tumble dryer, and if you shake that stuff in the darkness, you'll see that you get green lights. It's like a kind of weird sonoluminescence.
Yeah,
so shake the colours.
It is a bit,
lights in the darkness. And so it's just static,
I'm gonna make it.
I'll never say I've used that static to make fire or anything. I'm not manifesting powers.
No, Steve.
So
I'm going to make a confession though, because just to boil this down, because what we're talking about is illusion, and this is something I actually studied at college. So I did circus skills and magic, like proper performance art magic and pyrotechnics and all sorts of stuff. But when you're talking about that, it's an illusion. You're utilizing other either chemicals in the case of pyrotechnics, or mirrors, smoke, whatever it may be, or when we're talking about static, but that's the utilization of an external force or a piece of equipment to generate an illusion. Now, we have an illusion all day long when we look at our TV screen. Everybody who watches it that's unawake will believe everything they see on that flickering box. But ultimately speaking, that's just another layer of illusion, and that's what we're talking about. But when we say magic, it's more about grammar than, which is, I think the etymology is grimoire anyway, isn't it? It's from a book of magic anyway, is it not?
I studied into Hermeticism through, I got interested, but I had a lack of understanding from what I was reading. I don't think I could understand it, if I'm honest with you, especially Hermeticism. But I got friends with Left Hand Path. Now, this guy is very well versed in this. So I've had him on my channel. I will again, hopefully on the weekend. He puts things, the esoteric, into outside of the esoteric agenda, what the YouTube would like to propagate with Athena and Zeitgeist and the rest. He tells you how it's been perverted and explains it. It's no perversion of reality. This is exactly what's happening. Please have a look on his channel, Left Hand Path. He puts Hermeticism, as you know, Hermetic arts are lost to us, but alchemy and all of this unfolding story seems to be a part of the Philosopher's Stone and our quest for eternal life. Now, you mentioned just now.
I agree with that. I definitely say like and subscribe to Left Hand Path and all that. But we've got Steve here, and I think you'll agree. So far, what he's had to say has been pretty compelling. So I'm keen to hear more from Steve. I know you're keen to get stuff in. I've already fell into that trap and wanted to interrupt and put my knowledge in, but I really want to hear more from Steve.
Me too.
Yeah, and I want to check the chat really, really quick, guys, if you'll allow me. And then I've got some more questions for Stephen. because we have some interesting peeps in chat. We have Twitwit, hey. We have Arwen. We have Yvette. We have Charlotte. We have Jed Skeptic.
Right.
Hello, Jed. And Jed is making the statement about basically someone mentioning Jews again. So Jed, I will elaborate on that in just a second for you. And he's also saying, what is he saying? I'm finding it. Anyway, Jed is here, and we want to make sure he knows that we know he's here. Hey, Jed. And Vampire P says, shout me out. What's up? Ryan is here. Vince is here. Hey, Vince.
Vinny.
You're awesome, man.
And Jed, we all know
Charlotte.
you love me.
This is funny. I just want to like say this really, really quickly because the people that are actually in chat, you guys rock, man.
Have you got a link to the chat, please? I can't find it. How do you spell McGill? I'm not being dopey, but I can't spell McGill.
Give me 1 second, Martin. But
Okay.
honestly, the people that are in chat, like Vince, Vince was with me before I ever even started talking about flat Earth.
Yeah, I got a few like that. Oh, I actually, embraced, brought in, got them to post. I've got maybe 100 like that or more. I'm not joking either.
I do want to say that this is really important to me. I mean, have you been smoking, Barbie? No, I don't smoke weed, and bullshit. So there you go, if that's what you're talking about. But the people are important because when we're giving this information, at the end of the day, it is my opinion. I can't prove it as fact, but it is what I believe. And if I share that with you guys and I think that it's going to be helpful, then that matters. So you guys rock in chat. Even Jed, I think you rock, buddy. You are my friend. But we're going to go to kind of talking about what Jed's onto about the Jew thing. And I'm going to say that, we're not talking about like being hateful here. We're talking about what's real. We have Jesuits, and we have this Jewish connection. It is within the power structure. You cannot deny it. It's the same question as which came first, the chicken or the egg. I don't know, but what I know is there's an obvious connection to Jewish people and an agenda. I mean, I'm not even going to go into that agenda at this particular second.
Sorry, Barbie. Can people bring up the Jewish question without fear? I talked to a friend of mine, a skinhead from my best friend from school just now. I turned him onto my website. He said he heard in Ely that I was a flat earther and an activist. Now, this guy, I don't want to go into too much of his private life, but he sells CDs in California. He's known all over the world, but for music of a certain genre. He said to me that he wants to have a further word with me. He wants me to explain it to him. And I said to him, if we stuck to our guns, when we said we would when we were young, and none of this had gone down. And I explained to him briefly, bullet points, and I'm meeting up with him. So,
well, how about if we explain it this way? Let's just take, for instance, people that take the Bible at face value, and everything that's in the Bible is correct, and this is what you live by. Then if you work your way back into the Old Testament, let's take the Old Testament and the New Testament, and lay them on each hand. It's almost like you're talking about two different gods, two whole different ways of thinking. So what happened here exactly? With the Jewish people, they keep telling everyone they're the chosen people.
By who?
But are they waiting? Let me finish, and I'm going to get Stephen to kind of help me out with this, because this is a touchy subject, and I don't want to like offend people. That's not what I'm trying to do. I am trying to.
Can I pick up?
Yes, you can.
So, first and foremost, people are afraid. Here's what happens when you teach entire generations of adults how to behave like children. They fail to verbalize really, really hard questions. They are afraid of public opinion, and they're afraid of being called anti-Semitic. They're afraid of all of that hatred that comes at you. Well, I will say this. People have threatened the lives of our children. Somebody at some point in time has lied to generations of people. Certain Kabbalistic regimes of individuals have completely monopolized the capability and use of armed force. They have monopolized the banking system. They tell us we can't own land and that we are goyim. Let me tell you something. This goes on and on and on. And as adults, I will say something. I'm not an anti-Semite for talking about the truth. The tricks, go and play them in someone else. They won't work in people who are strong enough and who have enough will to stand against them. The bottom line is that when they stand together, they are strong. When we stand together, they will not penetrate. The bottom line is that we have allowed them, through our own ignorance, to do what they have done. They had every right to do what they did. And we deserved to have it done to us because we were complacent. We were dumb animals. We weren't capable of fully understanding what was right in front of our faces. And with the simplest of things, human discernment, we would have found the truth and none of this would have happened. Who's to blame? We're to blame, but they still did it. We talk about morality. This is absolutely pivotal. We lie every day. We'll meet people and we don't even know why. This is the simplest example I can give of this. You might not like someone's face. And by example, you don't like them. You're not to be blamed for that. You just don't like them, and that's fine. Some people get on, some people don't. I've met people in my life who are just, let's imagine everybody's got a magnetic field, and some attract and some don't. Some absolutely repel one another. Well, I've experienced repulsion from people. And so that absolutely happens. But the bottom line is that at some point in time, we have to talk about this. We have to say, Jesuits seem to be in control of everything, and we have the right to say this. If Jesuits want to pipe up and try to make us bad guys for saying, we understand that this is how things are, we're not saying that you guys are evil or whatever, but the bottom line is that it has become this. It doesn't matter how it became that. We can talk about that. That's for academia. But the reality is what we see. The testable reality is right there in front of us. I'll not be told that the truth's not the truth. I don't care what anyone else has to say about my opinion. God gave you legs and God gave you fingers. And if you don't like what I've got to say, you turn it off or you walk away. That's power. That's how to exert your will. You must accept. Let's talk about the New World Order. Because the New World Order's coming, who's going to make it? Are we going to let them make it, or are we making it? Well, they've already said, it's been alluded to, that we would choose the New World Order. Well, maybe that is exactly what's supposed to be happening here. That once we are I'd already said this, alluded to this earlier on. We're all sitting in our arse having a conversation instead of being out there stopping things from happening that shouldn't be happening, from taking the action that we have every moral right to take. It's not just our moral right to stand up and defend our children and our communities against anything, any harm. There is no excuse. If you bring any kind of threat to us, we will defend ourselves. No name calling, no bullshit, no media fucking hoopla will ever stop us. When you are capable of standing up, you must stand up. And when we as a collective community, not just flat earthers, but everyone who can recognise that there is a deep-seated need for change in society, that there are capitalistic regimes of people who have come together, they're affecting economic terrorism. They buy up everything. They claim ownership over everything. And so, you know, when the banks default, this is how economic terrorism works. It's surreptitious and they do it through the law. It's all through the law, but it's their law. It's not my law. It's not a law that I condone. Usury is wrong. It should be abolished. The abolition of usury has been a massively contentious issue all throughout history. And behind usury, Jesus said it about the fucking money lenders, and he toppled the tables over at the temple. This has been there from the start, and we're still dealing with this problem. You know, so what are we supposed to say about it?
Sorry, what do you mean by usury? Sorry to interrupt. What do you mean by usury?
Interest added on loans. That it's just blatantly against the law. It's wrong. Again, knowing how the monetary system works, they print money from nothing. So let's restart the system just to explain it very, very quickly. You reset the system, there's no money in existence. I print some funny money. I give you £1. I tell you that you have to give me £1.50 back, but I've only made £1. So there's not £1.50 in existence for you to repay me. So you give me the pound that you've got, but you still owe me money. So then you've got to borrow more money from me. So that you then owe even more money. This is the perpetual debt creation system. This is what's called and referred to as the global banking slavery. That's usury, just in short.
So,
the entire concept of creating a system, a monetary system, which is based on interest, building up over time. No nation can pay off national debt. People imagine that their taxes are paying off national debt, which is a complete farce. First and foremost, your nation is bankrupt. That's why you use what's called a fiat currency, because there's no gold. There's no gold to back the money. So because there's national debt, every penny that goes to pay for, every penny that's paid in tax has to pay off national debt. So because we have now just learned that there's not enough money in existence to pay back the debt because of usury, we have to then borrow more money. Creating this, what is it, Sisyphus, who is pushing the rock up the hill. Sisyphus, every single day, pushing that rock up the hill, and every day it rolls back down to the start and off it goes back up again. Well, that's what's happening. Well, that's why they call it a black hole economy, you know, because there's no way out. There's no way out.
Well, if I were to like speak on this just a tad bit more so that I can elaborate even more to people on where I'm at with this, and everyone else can speak for themselves. If there was a freaking virus moving through society and it was making everyone ill that it contacted, we wouldn't have any problem calling out this virus and saying, this is a freaking virus. This is what is affecting society. This is what's making people sick. Again, I don't want to sound like this freaking hater, because I'm not a hater. I'm not. But I recognize reality. And the reality is we have these two groups of people. And again, it doesn't matter which one came first, the chicken or the fucking egg. It is what it is. Jad mentioned in chat the richest guy in the world right now is a Mexican. But Jed, I guarantee you that he got rich through a connection that had to do with Rome or Israel. Let's just put it nicely and just say Israel. So Stephen, what I'm asking you is, people have guilt. They have guilt for calling out the obvious. My feeling on it is that this is part of the plan. This is how clever the people we are dealing with are.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about how television really works. Right. So we now know that all television, it's fair to say that almost all of it is an absolute pile of horse shit. I've been cut off. Am I still in? Is it Barbie that's out?
you're good, Stephen. Keep going.
Okay. So utilizing the media, right? Let's go back to mentalism. Let's talk about characters like Derren Brown. So here's a mentalist whose daily job it is to trick people, and he's finessed this so he can pick your pocket, he can take your watch off your wrist, he can get your jewellery off your ears, off your fingers, he could probably get your tie off. I've seen people doing this, people literally removing items of clothing from people without them even realising. So here's a group of individuals who are then utilising this technology. This is what the real Project Bluebeam is. When people talk about Project Bluebeam as if they were going to project God's face into the sky, I'm sure there was consideration for all of that. The real Project Bluebeam is your television. That was how to brainwash everyone everywhere. Let's face it, with all the problems in the world, they were really, really concerned with making sure that there was a TV in every single home. So let's just assume for a second, it's fair to say that they used television, they used radio, they used tabloids, and they used music and other entertainment to brainwash people. The subtlety of language, the things that they say, things that are shown. You can influence people's behaviours. Let's look at the hypersexualization of the youth. Let's look at examples like Disney, who have inserted these images, sexual images, for kids to see. There's penises everywhere, and dildos, and vibrators, and there's vaginas. There's a whole bunch of stuff. You know, anyone who wanders off can go and see a whole bunch of that. It all seems a bit tongue-in-cheek if you're just looking at it from, Disney, a couple of cheeky animators. But then you look at it as a whole, you look at just how much is put out and how much of it's really propaganda, and how it's really utilised to put ideas into people's heads, and that it is so much more profound. Right from the outset, the only purpose is to brainwash you. So that is Project Bluebeam. They absolutely succeeded. So people can write Project Bluebeam off. You know, how many people are? Let's face it. How they'll never ever be able to coordinate God appearing in the sky. You know, you could maybe do it in one nation. You know, but people are too clever. They're just too fucking clever. They'd figure that shit out. And as much as I've heard through the grapevine of YouTube nonsense, really, that the government did propose this. They were going to put God's head, or they were going to have Allah or whoever appear, or Muhammad or whoever it was, above the palace in Baghdad or whatever. And this was what they were going to do, to have a coup instead of invading. And it was all just this nonsense. You know, someone had obviously just told this bullshit story and then put this nonsense out so that people would talk about Project Bluebeam as if it was, holograms. And people have talked about, I'm not saying for a second that they couldn't fake aliens. Actually, I've got a lot to say about how they could. But I don't believe for a second that that was ever on the agenda. I think the real Project Bluebeam really is television. It's in your living room. It is. That is the conspiracy. It's where it starts. BBC, anyone that lives in the UK will remember BBC One. In between every single programme, you had a spinning globe. Every single programme ended, and there was the globe after every single one. And so that's Project Bluebeam, because, you know, it's obvious. It seems obvious enough to me. I don't even know what the question was now. I've kind of wandered off.
Yeah, that was my route into flat Earth. So before doing flat Earth videos, I did one video because I'd been looking at for, I don't know, a couple of years, subliminal messaging and looking at Bernays and Freud and how we get programmed. And when you say subliminal messages to most people, they'll picture that outro that you got in the States where they had their national anthem and they had the words. And that is subliminal messaging, absolutely. You know, there's no way to push that out of the category, but it isn't really subliminal messaging because the globe that you just described, that's real subliminal programming. So I did a video about this. I had Peter Griffin, and he comes, he just gets given a globe. It doesn't make any sense in the plot. It's just a present for a birthday. No one would think of that as subliminal programming, but it absolutely is. It's just another globe, which is bullshit programming, subliminal.
You think about how, you know, because at the end of every night on the BBC, you know, because the television, the programming used to end at 12 o'clock, and so the globe was there all through the night. You know, it was always there, and it was only half an hour, only 30 minutes in between seeing the globe again. And the globe was there for 30 seconds, and there was a clock that actually ticked round for 30 seconds. So you were sat there, even as a kid, and it's a deeply, deeply, profoundly ingrained for 30 whole seconds, looking at the spinning globe, seconds every 30 minutes. I can't imagine a more effective Project Bluebeam than that, you know? So when I hear other stuff about Project Bluebeam, I just kind of dismiss it as fanciful nonsense, you know? I wouldn't dismiss the idea of holograms in the sky and all of that other stuff, our capability, and I've seen, you know, there's quite sophisticated light shows, laser shows that you can see, and you can go and see these three-dimensional effects. You know, it looks like the building's warping. It looks like there's a horse is kind of morphed from the building, and there's a very sophisticated, very, very, you know, very tight in terms of the production. It's easy to see how they could utilize technologies like that for an alien invasion or whatever. I wouldn't preclude those things.
But if we were to like go back before people were able to be programmed actually through the television, through propaganda, even the word shill, it amazes me that I hear so many people throw around the word shill, but they don't actually know what it means. It started in movie theaters where all these propaganda pieces were playing from World War II, and you had these people back there clapping, going, yay. But before that, how exactly do you think they programmed people? I mean, I'm thinking the Bible. Let's touch on that just a little bit about the Bible. I said this a little while ago, and again, I'm not out to offend people. But if you take the Bible and you take the Old Testament versus the New Testament, it's like, who freaking wrote these things? I mean, was this guy the same as this guy? Was this God the same as this God? And before I even go much further, I'm going to tell everybody that I believe in a creator. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means. But I think it means that whatever or whomever created us doesn't need to be talked about and written about. And it's like building this house of cards, and I've got it perfect. You know, I've built this beautiful house of cards. Well, later I can't come in and pull the ace of spades from down here because it doesn't play out anymore. I know that's shite to a lot of people, but I think we're on our own now. So when you hear other people talking about this, we are God stuff, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but what I'm saying is we're in control now. But yeah, going back to the question, Stephen.
No. But just before you do, because that's such a beautiful way you've put that. I'm so glad you turned that into a positive, because my heart was getting going, because you made it sound so negative until you said, yeah, we're the ones in control now. It's all about our judgment, our decision. And I tried to talk about this the other day when I was talking about people in a courtroom setting. And ultimately speaking, you've got, it doesn't matter what, in our reality, in our society, we have a consensus reality. It doesn't necessarily, sorry, can you just mute a sec, Barbie? It doesn't necessarily matter whether or not the facts that are presented are true or not. All that matters is what's agreed upon. So when you have a story presented to a judge or a judge and jury, they decide what has occurred based on the information that's actually been presented. But it doesn't mean that that's the reality of the situation at all. It's just what has been accepted. And what we are realizing is that we can accept or deny whatever we choose. You know, obviously you'd be a fool to deny something if the evidence is compelling and you can verify it, which is the most important bit. But beyond that, anything else that people just present to you, like NASA or anything else that's unverifiable, I can choose not to accept that. And that's a very empowering thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying here. Let me explain very, very quickly. I'm from New York. My dad was Scottish. My mom was American Indian. I was adopted by Dutch Irish. So I grew up Catholic. My mom is now Methodist. I went to church. I was freaking hammered with it. I'm very aware of the Bible, guys. I'm very aware of it. I was confirmed, etc. But when I really sit down and think about this stuff, we're given this choice, this path. I talk about this a lot in videos, and I know Stephen will agree with me. You have to shape your world beautiful. It's touching, you know, because we are in control. God's not going to come in and save you. God created you. God left a fingerprint, in my opinion, and everyone won't agree. Stephen might not agree. I find that fingerprint is possibly the ether, but he left you in control, or she. I don't know. I'm going to say it's a she, but it's up to us to shape this beautiful. It can be flat. It can be freaking a globe. You can say it's concave. You can say it's hollow. Say whatever you like. Up to us, you know. So I think so many times we hear people like projecting this as, well, I'll use Eric Dubay as an example of, we're the gods. I'm not so sure that he's wrong in saying we have the power. You know, we have the power to do something good or to ignore something totally bad. And with that, I will throw it off to someone else like Stephen and saying, what was my original question? Okay, the Bible. And before TV, before radio, we had what kind of programming? I mean, would you agree the Bible is programming?
Yes, absolutely. Sinai, the Ten Commandments coming down from there, and I talked about this idea of the Sai man, that these ideas of sigil magic were practiced in the mystery schools a long. Look at Alexander the Great. You know what his teacher was Aristotle. I'm sure Aristotle was Alexander the Great's teacher, and his teacher was Socrates and Plato. And I mean, So here was these guys deeply. I mean, if we're talking about, if we accept that the history we're told has any basis for reality, you know, and I take it all with a pinch of salt. If we accept that Aristotle and Plato and Socrates were all kicking about and they were directly related, directly involved with the teaching of Alexander the Great, it means that the mystery schools knew all of the stuff and they were already deeply involved in the idea of conquering the world. And you can't conquer, you can't subdue. There's a great saying, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head how it goes. No nation or no people can be held by force of arms alone. It doesn't matter how long Alexander the Great stayed in Persia. He could never have kept Persia from the Persian people over the long term if he only tried to use the force of arms. And so you have to develop other techniques. You know, if you can't subdue a people if you've constantly got a knife to their throat, you have to think that you're one of them. And so we'll talk about this. I'll go into this concept much deeper at some point. But you essentially infiltrate. We know historically how this is done. They infiltrate communities through marriage. It can be done in a variety of different ways. You'll see it happening most obviously with the well-to-do families. You want to marry into the right class of individual, and so that these people infiltrate by infiltrating these families or infiltrating the right organizations, governments, whatever it happens to be. And then over the long term, you've got propaganda. It's presented to us as if propaganda was somehow a new idea, but that's obviously fallacious nonsense. It is just obviously fallacious. They knew how to propagandize. We are very good at manipulation. Manipulation is the fundamental principle behind any form of psychological manipulation of another, or sigil magic, whatever you want to call it. That ability to understand oneself, that's why it's so important. And you hear in the Bible, know thyself. Well, you can't know someone else if you don't know yourself. And this is probably one of the fundamental problems why so many people are led or are prone to being led. They're kept so busy that they don't even have enough time to go on that esoteric personal journey, you know, that inner walkabout. Get to know thyself. It's Get to Know Thyself Friday. We should have that in the flat earth for globeheads. Get to know thyself Friday. You just bunk off work. Fuck pay my taxes on Friday. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to go on an esoteric journey for a little while and try and make some sense of the inner me. Once you know the inner me, then you can make sense of the inner somebody else. Then you've got the ability to manipulate. And then at that choice, you've got the fork in the road. The choice. Do you choose to be the demonic Sith Lord? Or do you choose to be the Jedi? It's quite clear. You look at that Ben Kenobi was a lying sack of shit in Star Wars. You know, he just lied right to Luke's face. He knew the truth right from the start. But he used manipulation, most obviously when they enter Mos Eisley, and he says to the stormtrooper, "Oh, you don't need to see his identification." And so he's using this basic form of manipulation, you know, really, really basic manipulation. So that's that basic idea that you can influence people. That you basically alluded to this. I love this analogy. Flat Earth, is it flat water? Flat Earth, Flat Water was talking about this in one of the videos that I'd watched. He does readings, and I draw a little bit. And so when I draw, I'll just stick flat water on. You know, I like to listen to him, you know, doing Bible verses and all of that stuff. It's relaxing. So I stick him on. But he's been talking about the Cave of Wonders or the Cave of Treasures, which I like. It's nice. It's a romantic idea for the world. You know, we're talking about Jews and the terrible people that keep us all down and manipulation. All of that stuff is great and everything. So we'll go on to a nicer concept, and that's the Cave of Wonders. So if you take a cave and you shout into the cave, you'll get an echo. And when that echo comes back at you, it'll be a reflection of what you put out, you know. So if you shout "fuck you" into the cave, well, the echo that comes back at you is pretty negative. It's also going to shout "fuck you" right into your face, and so that's an idea of how magic works. When you choose to manipulate, well, can you imagine scenarios when you're manipulating for good? I can. Every single time that you're engaged in a conversation with someone, imagine you're at work. You have to work with this person every day. They get on your wick, something fierce. But, you know, most of the time you're reserved. You know, you're showing tolerance and patience for this individual. Sometimes your will break. But all of the time that you're showing tolerance to this person, what you'd rather be doing is shouting at them. So you're manipulating the situation, and you're only putting out a tone of conversation that's positive enough to make sure that the worst doesn't happen. You know, does that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And the concepts you're describing get spun out into karma. I had this conversation the other day with somebody, and it's what you're saying is true, but it only applies to 95% of people. There's a percentage of people that this does not apply to.
There's no doubt that some people, it depends how you're looking at that. You know, the bottom line is that the ability to manipulate another is within, you know, we would make a blanket statement and we'll just say everyone can, because it's just easier that way. We just say everybody generally has that capability. How you use that, there are very, very nice people who would never say boo to a ghost, you know, that way. They have the same feelings as other people, you know, that way that there'll be this individual has a saintly disposition. This person is exceptionally patient for, you know, whatever it happens to be. I've been in plenty of situations where I required remarkable amounts of patience, and sometimes you don't always have that reserve of patience to be able to deal with the situation. But anyway, back to the whole point about manipulation. Because the whole point was the question that Barbie had put forward about how to manipulate people, and was the Bible really used like that? And it absolutely was. There's no doubt about it. And we really have to talk about morality. We have to talk about whether it was good or whether it was bad to do certain things. One of the main things, and this is exceptionally important for Flat Earth, because it regards the papacy. Anyone who knows anything about the law might know about the Sesti KV Act. And so let's take one of the biggest lies that there has ever been that's next to the Flat Earth, and that is where the idea of the Walking Dead comes from. Where's its core? Where does that core idea originate? The idea that some human beings, philosophically, theologically, again, the Aryan race imagines themselves superior. You've heard Jewish people making reference to themselves as the chosen people. And so this idea is all throughout history that some people imagine that they're better than other people. What was I actually alluding to there? What was I getting at? You were about to interject there, Barbie.
Walking Dead, Sesti KV Act.
Yeah, the Walking Dead.
What I wanted you to kind of explain is the word zombie.
Well, the word zombie is like the word monster. You know, these are legal. First and foremost, these are legal terminologies. Everybody is aware that legalese is a thing. That flat earthers aren't more focused in this tells me that they're not really concerned with real world, and that they'd much rather spend more of their time watching videos and trying to find that elusive proof that says that they're right after all. Some people are experimenting. Some people need to be here. There's let's talk about the flat earth movement in general and how it's kind of moving forward. People have to be here to, to explain to others, to put those ideas out and to support those individuals who are just finding this for the first time. But the rest of us absolutely don't. We need to be out in the real world, and we're completely focusing our resources and our time and our effort in the wrong place. How much, they've corralled everyone into YouTube. You're not affecting change as much as the virus of flat earthism is spreading. They're not going out of their home. That's why I stopped making videos over a year ago. and I went and I built a business, and you know, I went and had a real life, and I was able to become the person I always expected myself to be. That sounds a bit silly. I'd always let myself down for one reason or another. I didn't push myself hard enough, and then I just did it. I had enough personal power or whatever to just go out, went out, did a business. I've now given the business away to my brother and his partner, who, you know, are doing really, really well. What was the question again? I wandered off beat. Barbie, you've muted yourself. You're muted.
Yes, I am a freaking retard, Stephen. Everyone knows this. Let's just get a little of my retardedness in this chat tonight. But I want you to explain to people where the word zombie comes from in context to maritime law.
It's all so convoluted. See, when you talk about this stuff, it's so easy to get mixed up here because it is so deeply convoluted. So back to legalese, that was the whole point. When you're looking at the law, you have to understand where the source of law is. So in Britain, the source of law is the Magna Carta. Then you have to understand why the Magna Carta came about in the first place. And then you have to understand what form of law was here before the Magna Carta. And why did all of that happen in the larger context of the Catholic Church, who were in control of everything? The papacy was in control and still is in control of everything. We talk about these ideas, the separation of church and state. Most people are so devoid and so removed from this idea that it's foreign to them. They've got literally no idea how to even begin with these ideas. So the idea is that the church gets to be the overseer, right? This is the contract, the deal with the devil. The papacy gets to be in charge of everything. You must ask the papacy for permission. So long as you have the papal permission, then you can create whatever law that you've asked permission to create within your country. So looking at legalese, looking at how this starts, what legalese really is. Martin had alluded earlier to the idea that English is a language which is very young, that it's essentially a slave language. Another language similar to English is Esperanto. Esperanto was supposed to be the first unifying universal language, a conglomeration of languages, obviously Spanish, French, Dutch, a bit of English, probably some Latin, some other stuff going on. So Esperanto was the first serious attempt at creating a universal language that was presented as such. However, English, it was quite clear that they built English for a certain reason. And I think English was the first universal language. It was the language that they wanted to spread everywhere. The drudgery of the effort of trying to, you know, imagine trying to make all Chinese people speak English. How many generations is that going to take you? Seriously, make it their first language so that they forget. Scottish people spoke Gaelic, you know, not so long ago. Gaelic was still on television not so long ago because they had to create a facility for those who still spoke the national language. Well, Gaelic was beat out of the Scots, quite frankly. You know, the Jacobite Revolution was really where the final straw was. The Jacobites were beaten down, and the last remnant of real Scottish tradition and history, not the Hollywood version. You know, it was almost like after Scotland had been taken over by English rule, essentially what had happened was that Scotland became a caricature of itself, and it started selling boxes of tartan as if that was somehow Scottish. It started selling Scottishness as a brand. So that's what happened to Scotland after the fact. That came much after. Who's that? Somebody else is going to chat. Hello there.
It's Erwin.
Okay, so what were we talking about? We were talking about legalese. So we were talking about the source of the law and where the law starts. So let's assume for a second that, because these concepts are still prevalent today, you can, you know, Google these and you'll find them readily. So you'll find concepts about the law of the land, and you'll find concepts about the law of the sea. You'll find concepts about the Roman Talmudic law. It's regarded in there's three forms of law available to British people, and that's common law. Sorry, not common law. Or common law is available. It's commercial law, essentially, maritime law, and Roman Talmudic law. The Roman Talmudic part of this is regarded as being a death cult. That's why judges wear black robes in a court, because they're honouring the dead. But there's a whole bunch more to this. Once you understand that what you're dealing with is a commercial court, when anyone goes to court, they're dealing with commerce. They're dealing with a whole bunch of other stuff, actually. But when you're dealing with commerce, you are a corporate entity. Explaining all of this stuff would take far, far too long. Anybody who gets mail through the door, and it's coming from somebody who wants money from you, you'll find that the mail comes through your door and it's mailed to you in capital letters. So that's the straw man, the legal straw man for your name. We'll go into this in another podcast, because this really, there's a lot to this. But this is what all law is really derived from. All modern law is derived from a papal bull. A papal bull is essentially it's a proclamation from the papacy. They were making a pronunciation that the average people were not entitled to land. This goes back to this idea about the Aryan nation, and that some people might imagine themselves to be superior than others. So the papacy essentially said, no one has rights to land. You're never allowed to own land. You're allowed to own a house, but you don't own the land that it sits on. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes, that's part of this, and that everybody needs to be paying attention to that for 10 minutes. Just 2 days worth of research out of Flat Earth to learn about the Cesti KV Act. The year that this was instituted in Britain was 1666. An interesting year. I'm sure people will agree. Anyone that knows anything about British history will know that the Great Fire of London was taking place during 1666. This was an inside job. There's no doubt about that. The Great Fire of London was an insurance job. But there was more to it than that. During the Great Fire of London, it's speculated that the reason that they set fire to London was because London was beset by the plague. The Black Death was everywhere. And so it's quite likely that they set fire to London so that they could curtail and contain the Black Plague. While all of this was going on, because we know that they like to slide things in under the radar, so they set fire to London, and while London's burning, literally, while London's burning, the politicians of the day went into Parliament and they passed the Act of Cesti KV through Parliament, while everybody else was busy trying to put out a fire, the biggest fire that London has ever seen. So this is what really happened there. There was no way that they could have passed this legislation if anyone had been paying attention, because people were bloody clever back in that time. A lot more clever than people probably give them credit for. So Cesti KV says that you're dead in the law. So we'll go back to this idea that what the Walking Dead is and what the zombies are. I know that this is a very long answer. There's no short answer to talking about zombies. So we hearken back to this papal bull, this decree from the papacy that said that you were less than they were. And who were they? We'll define that for another time. That some people were less than human. That some people were cattle. And this is how it's written into the law, that people were chattel of the estate. And because you're chattel, you're no different than animals. That's another, there's another way to look at it. Zootopia is one of the modern Disney Pixar or whatever movies. This is a play on this idea that some human beings are not altogether human. I could talk about this because it's a concept I absolutely agree with. If the world truly is flat, if everything we suspect is true, and there are some in the world for whom the deception will never wash the deception from their eyes, if we can't convince those people, if we're right and they're wrong, but we can never convince them, what are they? Are these really human beings? Well, this is a philosophical question and a theological question, and one well worth asking. And it's a question that has been asked throughout the generations, and it's one that SDKV particularly points right at. It says that some people lack discernment to such a degree that they are incapable of making proper human decisions. These are difficult concepts, but again, like I said, they've been batted around the place quite a lot. If you go and look historically at these ideas, you'll see that these pop up. But this comes from the papacy, you know. This isn't. You can go and research this. So Pope Boniface the Eighth was the Pope who passed this through. They say that they've lost the original document. However, they do have a version of the document which you can read. It's regarded as being one of the most horrific documents of all time, and it's probably no wonder why they've hid it, because he's probably come out and said, "You're all dirty, filthy bastards. None of yous are human. You're all less than I am, and I own everything. And if you don't like it, we're going to, we'll turn you all against one another because we have all the money." We all know how wars are financed now. If the papacy had all the money, because they still do, then they could hire other nations to take anybody out. If you take, you just imagine how the mafia really works and then put it into the context of the papacy, it's easy to see how you could keep people in line. So this is how this was rolled out across the world. And then you look at colonialism, empire building. You have to look at the British Empire. They colonialized the entire world. There's very few areas that they missed. China is one of the very few exceptions. China was a nation that was only broken into, as far as I'm concerned, in recent times. They very much kept their doors shut. They've never engaged, you'll notice this, China's never engaged in a war with anyone. Does anyone know this? China doesn't war with people. They just don't war with anyone. No one's ever went to war with China because they're insular. They don't work like that. They're not expansionist. They're not colonialists, they're not empire builders. They're just China. They consolidated their nation a long time ago, and they were quite happy. That way. Let everybody else deal with their own problems.
So when you talk about this,
can I just finish up with the empire builders? This is really important in the whole context. You were talking.
You continue.
One of the first ideas was about how to brainwash so many people, more or less. So the empire builders, you get the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, and then you get the French. You've obviously got a little bit of Dutch colonialism going on, or German anyway, Deutsch. So these empires spread this to every corner of the world, and this is how SDKV, and this is what the entire concept of the zombie apocalypse. The zombie apocalypse literally is when everybody learns about this SDKV Act for the first time and they rise up. Imagine rising up. They philosophically regard you as being dead in the law because of this stuff, which is quite fucked up. But that is literally what it says, and that this law is it's in every nation. It's certainly in America. It's definitely in India. It's in Japan. It's all across the Middle East. It's in Turkey. It's all across Europe. It's in Africa. There's nowhere that's immune to this. I would have said that there's maybe 2 nations in the world that haven't been exposed to this, and that's probably Iran and North Korea. They seem to be they're the only 2 nations in the world that don't have centralized banks. They're the only people who have avoided the Rothschilds. They're the only people who said, we're not interested. So they're the only 2 countries left in the world without these institutions. And so everywhere else seems to have...
I've got to interject though there, because like with anything in this particular sphere of the internet, when we're talking about anything conspiratorial, or what they would label conspiratorial, there's a layer of bullshit smeared over this. In other words, if you were to just do a quick cursory search of the SDKV Act, you'd see that in the UK it would appear, or how it's phrased is that it's no longer in application. That's how it seems if you just did a cursory search. And I only know this because I explained this to my father, and he just did exactly that in front of me and showed me. I was like, you go through the same conversation you go through with people who come to Flat Earth, which is you've got to understand how deception works. You know, to assume that you're just going to go straight to Google and have them tell you this in exactly how it is just ludicrous.
Really interesting, just to interject. So the canons of positive law, where you'll find this stuff. Right, so forget. So there's different levels to law. We spoke really briefly about law, so we'll just explain how law really works. Even although countries can pass legislation through acts and statutes, ultimately the papacy made a decree. Okay, so when they made that proclamation, they've not rescinded it. The papacy gets to make this decision, and they hold the keys here to this door, not the British government. But that's not the whole story. You'd alluded to the idea that it might say, or it could say possibly, that it might not be maybe in enforcement right now. The most recent amendment to the SESTI-KV Act was in 2001, which was the Patriot Act. And let me tell you, people, so this is an extension of SESTI-KV. SESTI-KV is most certainly alive and well. This was right after 9/11. That's one of the reasons that 9/11 was pushed through, because it created a greater security state. They were able to then start infiltrating people and listening and wiretapping, and all of this security state stuff started getting kicked into high gear. But both America and Britain passed this legislation in 2001, and it's the Patriot Act, essentially, which states that we're all enemies of the state. That's what it says. We're all enemies of the state, and we're all potential terrorists. And that your government can hold you without charge. They can detain you for indeterminate amounts of time. They could possibly use any manner of subterfuge, probably torture, and they're even allowed to kill you. It states this quite clearly. Of course, they don't want people knowing about this because, I mean, but your property. Imagine being a cow. You know, oh, this cow's sick. Let's take this cow that's sick in the head, thinks the fucking earth's flat. Let's take this cunt out the back door and we'll just put him out of his misery. You know, that way. That's why you'll see this, that the police love this argument. If you're ever arrested, they'll say, are you feeling okay? You know, they'll be challenging your mental state. They'll say, I think that your thinking might be a little bit kind of ski with or whatever. And it doesn't matter. This is a blanket statement, you know, that way, because it immediately puts you on guard. But in particular, the Patriot Act allows them here in this country to start carrying guns. You're not allowed guns. You know, at the end of the day, you're not allowed guns. No one should have guns and all of that other jazz. So they've used the Patriot Act so that the British police can arm themselves on the streets. And it's used for a whole bunch of other stuff, including their ability. I can't remember what it's called. The terrorist, it's essentially an accusation that you're a terrorist. All they have to say, they can take you in, arrest you for this at any point in time, is literally just say, we suspect you of acts of terrorism. And it's a blanket statement. They'll never get into any bother for that, and they'll never have to be accountable for that because of this legislation. But that's, again, just the tip of that iceberg. So if we were defining zombie and all of that other stuff, again, I know that I've talked and rambled on for ages, but it's impossible to define those words in the law without talking about the SESTI-KV Act and what it's really all about. That it's really a philosophical concept that says that some human beings might be devoid of a soul, literally.
So because I have people in the chat saying, I thought there was a point, particularly Jed. I mentioned this earlier.
The point was that philosophically speaking, some people regard some human beings as not having a soul. That's what zombie is.
So if we kind of applied this whole idea of zombie to flat Earth, and what I was saying earlier about it's more than just this shape. It's another shape.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this. This is where we enter the esoteric possibilities. Some people might be familiar with Mobius loops. Are any of the guys watching familiar with Mobius loops? Anyone?
Are you asking us or the chat? I'm familiar with them. I'm sure Martin is, if he was still here. But yeah.
I've talked about this before in several chats, maybe once in my own. A lot of people bring up Klein bottles, but do tell. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, there's not really much to tell here. From our perspective, we're forced to look at what we can observe and what we can test, and beyond that, I'm not really sure. What's going on with this guy at the end here who's doing something weird with a crystal? I've got no idea what he's doing. He's put a crystal up. Has he got something to say? Anyone?
I can hardly hear you. Maybe get a bit
sorry,
closer to the mic.
I'm just screwing around, guys. Just keep on talking. I'm just
I
bored.
was wondering what was going on there.
Well, Arwen, I'm trying to get some important points across, and maybe afterwards we'll have a few seconds. But the Mobius loop is something important, and I want Stephen to explain this because he can do it much better than I can, although I've tried.
I'm not
So it doesn't
stopping you.
matter.
Just
Again, we're entering these esoteric possibilities. If we said, what is beyond the firmament, who could answer the question? If we said, what's deeper than 9 miles, who could answer the question? None of us. Absolutely none of us. So I don't have the answers, which is profoundly annoying. However, let's talk about the term flat earth and the purposeful and deliberate misnomer that term is. Well, the earth being distinctly different from water should not be described as being flat because it clearly is not. It undulates in a quite profound way. It could be said to grow as a crystal over time, and it grows in a variety of different ways. However, you look at the overall context of the environment, which constitutes what we define as being reality. We've never been deeper than 9 miles, so we'll say that it's 9 miles deep, and we've never been, I've got no idea what the highest altitude is. Let's say we've been to 250 miles. That's just an arbitrary thing. Who knows? It doesn't matter for argument's sake. So let's say that's existence between 9 miles down, 250 up. So there, Vsauce. People will be familiar with Vsauce. Vsauce describes reality as being a thin slice. So it would probably be much, much more apt to describe our reality as being a slice. For all intents and purposes, it's like we live in the sea. It's no different than the sea. The medium which we wander around in is, it's just right for us. The fish know that they're in water. I've got no idea. There are some fish which are bottom dwellers, which is a very detrimental term, really. We're bottom dwellers. See if you imagine it. I'm not saying that there's things in the sky. I'm not precluding that idea. I'll go with what I can see. As far as I'm concerned, there's no aliens. But there's certainly something else going on in terms of the density. If we apply density to this thing that we see, we're fucking really smack bang in trouble. We're really, really smack bang in trouble because it must get much denser below us. That's what we seem to observe. It's much denser below us, and there's much less density above us. That just seems to be it. I don't know if anybody would back me up on that. Is that a fair statement to make?
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, just blatantly obvious. So then we wander into this idea of monopoles, which we spoke about right at the very start. This idea that there isn't a South Pole. If there's not a South Pole, then what are we dealing with? We are dealing with a singular pole, which no one can explain, which is the entire problem with existence in the first place. We can explain the rules. We can make observations about what we see. And those rules, when you imagine the rules for magnetism or the rules for electricity, they make sense. Even Newton's laws of motion make sense. They just make sense. And they are observable, they're tangible things that can be measured and reproduced. Simple stuff. So we apply this density principle to magnetism. And we see, again, is it cymatics? Is that what that is? Anyone? When you're vibrating sound? And you can use sand or whatever. and you'll get a variety of patterns depending on the frequency.
Yeah, it's
I was alluding
cymatics.
before. I mentioned to both of you guys that the channel Wee Man, he's another Scottish guy. He again has been taking pictures of the stars and putting these pictures through 3D software. So the light values of the stars are being put through the program, and it's showing structure. Imagine trying to define what shape the moon was from our perspective. As some people are saying, the moon has no substance, or the moon's a hologram, or the moon is solid and it's not the sun that's solid. There's a whole bunch of ideas here. I'm not sure what ones the right ones are. Has everybody wandered off?
No, I'm here. I mean, you're on what I've been talking about, and you pointed that out earlier, how I've been saying in Hangouts and stuff that I see over 50% of the moon.
Yeah.
I have a telescope. So I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I don't. I do.
I've looked at the moon through my own telescope and all of that other stuff, and as far as I'm concerned, it looks bloody solid to me, you know, but it can't be. It can't be.
But let's be honest.
I don't understand the moon. There's no point in us really getting into the moon overly much because I don't understand any better than anybody else.
We can say this much, because we were talking about this earlier, how science does tell you the truth.
Yeah.
You have to find it. Yeah. Science says in many, many articles that by all freaking thoughts and purposes, the moon shouldn't be there. It's not explainable.
I can't explain the moon. If you were talking about white holes and black holes, you could, I suppose, just about. This is why they make up these ideas and these theories, and that's where we're at. So we've spent all of this time bringing down mainstream science, that they're making stuff up. Well, here we are doing the exact same thing. Everybody's become an armchair scientist now, and you know, it's an absolute fucking free-for-all. That's not the end of this story. The esoteric possibilities that come from all of this are innumerable. There's no way to count them all. In every nutcase, you've got to know that from this point on, it is a free-for-all. Anybody's guessing. Every mad bastard that you can think of with the maddest fucking idea that you could possibly come up with is waiting in the wings just now to come out and to dupe a whole bunch of people. So many ideas, spiritual, beyond the edge of the known. Again, I'd said that.
I think it's.
Said that, sorry.
We don't know. We were talking about this earlier, and it's like, you know, you have this coin, and you're spinning out till you get to the freaking edge, and you don't know what's beyond that. So anything goes. But in the midst of all this, I think people should be.
How we got here.
Yes, and also there's this little important part that says be honest. You know, I hear people saying, "Oh, for sure the moon's a hologram. For sure it's this. For sure it's that." I've gotten smacked a couple times for my opinions, but from what I observe with my 5 senses, it appears to be 3-dimensional. Beyond that, I can't.
I find the idea of floating sky islands to be preposterous. However, I've seen quantum locking. I know what quantum locking is. I can see it in effect. I know that it's a real world thing and that it is absolutely applicable here. And that we are dealing with, we're inside what can only be described as an electromagnetic containment sphere. I mean, I don't like to use the word sphere. I've got no proof of sphere, but we're certainly inside a containment field, which is electromagnetic. I mean, you can apply all of the other forces in there if you like. Looking at it all, looking at the moon, it would have to be freezing though. From what I know, I'm not sure that you're able to superheat an item, an object, before it was able to float. If the moon was magnetic, you know, If it was a giant magnet, say, but it was super cooled, it would absolutely float up there. If if it's that, because that's what quantum locking is. You imagine that, and that's what it's doing. It's essentially turning the electrons off. Essentially, imagine an eclipse. Imagine eclipsing the electrons inside something, and then all of a sudden, it's literally locked into place because of the position of the protons or whatever. I don't even know enough about that stuff, but that's quantum locking anyway.
I agree with you. You're right. My only issue comes from a really strange source, and that's Bob Nodell of Globebusters, who I'm sure you're aware of. Anyway, so this came up in conversation, and he used something that I didn't like as kind of proof of this, which was to say, well, he wasn't using it as proof. He was speculating anyway, obviously, but he was saying that NASA struck the moon, they launched something at it, and it rung. I was like, I don't really like that. I don't like the fact that you're using that evidence from NASA to lend credence to the idea that it could be levitating because it's hollow. But you're right, that's absolutely the case. It could very well be supercooled and magnetically levitating. Why not? I don't see any reason why not.
It's that way that we've got to that stage now where we would say to yourself, there's only one way to know if something's true, is if you're able to create a tabletop experiment to demonstrate the principles, and that those principles would be easily verifiable, checkable, and reproducible by anyone who did those tests. There's a whole bunch of stuff here that's applicable that people really haven't spent enough time looking at. But the idea, because that's what a Mobius loop is. So people will be aware, especially in the flat earth community, that if you track the sun every day at 12 o'clock throughout the year, then you get all of the images and you overlay them all over the top, you'll see a lazy 8. That's what it's called. It's called the lazy 8, and it's the infinity symbol. Well, when you understand that as a Mobius loop, so I've got a simple sheet of paper, and what you're essentially doing is just flipping it over one side and then attaching it to the opposite side of this. This is pretty crude, and the bit of paper's very, very small. I'll try and just kind of show that for what it is. So what you'll notice about this, even though it's very small, if I'd made a bigger one, it's a lazy 8. It's essentially the same shape as the infinity symbol, which is quite interesting. Whether it's really a part of this mystery of what the sun and the moon is, I don't know, but it seems quite compelling to me. The mystery about this is that it's one-dimensional. Again, a lot of people will be familiar with Mobius loops, so it's one-dimensional. It's only got one side. If you follow the edge, it's only got one edge, and it's only got one flat surface, and so it's one-dimensional. It's a profound object, as far as I'm concerned. I know a lot of people have their own ideas, but this is where I got the idea of spaghettification, and that we were actually inside a black hole. For one of the next times, we've been doing this chat now for about 2.5 hours or so. We've been on for a long, long while.
We have, and we talked about this earlier, how it might take some time.
It's undoubtedly going to need a few more, just to talk about a few more issues. But if you take this Mobius loop and you cut it down the middle, it will split in half. And the thing that you would imagine to happen is that you would end up with 2 separate Mobius loops. But that's not what happens. You end up with one Mobius loop after you've cut it in half. It's just the same Mobius loop. But then when you cut that one in half, it divides. And it's the exact same thing as talking about cellular mitosis. And in the grand context, it's absolutely spaghettification of the body, which is described to be what happens to people inside black holes. But just to be talking about Mobius loops, that was me just finishing up that idea there, really. That we see the sun in particular making that movement. I'm not sure, does the moon make the same lazy 8? I don't know. Does it?
They say that the moon follows the sun's path, but you know me, I'm not great on the whole where it's going, what it's doing.
Yeah, looking at that Mobius loop stuff, there's a lot to talk about there and whatnot. But it really is. We've been talking for about 2.5 hours now, so I think we should probably kind of wind up with a couple of things or whatever. If you want to wind up, we'll pick up another time.
Yeah, we're gonna have to pick up because there's so much going on. But wow, I didn't get to ask you like 10 questions or something.
Yeah, once people start talking, it's really, really not very good.
It's intense, but if you were to like put all of these things in context to the shape of your world, and what the shape of your world means to you, what would that be?
What it means to me, what to discover the flat Earth stuff and everything. I always believed in God.
And beyond that, like shaping your world beautiful, and what do people need to do, and
What people need to do, people, people are sitting around watching videos. People need to get off their backside, that way. What is it you want from the world? If you're going to shape your world better, if you're going to make your world better, if you want to make a difference, people do whatever they like, that way. I'm not anybody's preacher or anything. For me, flat Earth means, getting off your arse and actually testing stuff, actually doing everything that you dreamed of doing. I've got no idea what the answers are. People might die at the end up, and there's nothing beyond. That is just the end. And if that is the truth, then you should be bloody living your life to the fullest. That's all I've really got to say about that.
Can I have a bash at answering that? Because it's pretty much off the back of what you've just said, and it's one word, well, 2 letters. Do.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. So if Flat Earth has taught me anything else, it's the ability to now do things.
Yeah, definitely. Because it's easy to be, taken by fear. A lot of this is everywhere. People are taught and trained to be ignorant and to be fearful of their own actions. Ask your neighbours, ask your wife or whatever to go into your local high street or whatever and start shouting just at the top of their voice for no reason. No one's got the courage to do that. People don't want other people to look at them. And that basic fear, people have to be drunk before they don't have any inhibitions, that way. And it's not true. If you can't control yourself without, alcohol or any of that other stuff, then you should probably take a little bit of time to concentrate, focus on yourself and build strength, that way. You have to have the will to make the world better. If you having the will actually is the do part, But I can see people in the comment section who are not too happy anyway. So let's finish up. I'm done.
This is like normal stuff when you do hangouts. And to be fair, you and I spoke about this earlier. I think everyone deserves their say. I mean, because we have Jed in here. He definitely doesn't agree, but what interests me about people like Jed is something in his mind is clicking and saying, we need to look at this, look at that. He has an interest. So whether you think it's flat or round or whatever the shape, there's something going on here.
Yeah, everybody's got their own ideas, everybody's a dime store fucking scientist these days, and everybody's got the right answer. I'll say this final thing. You get 10 herds of elephants and they all need water, this watering hole of truth. And so they all come to the truth from different angles. And eventually, once they're at the watering hole of truth, having come at the truth from different angles, they'll argue with one another about what the fucking truth is. They're not clever people, they're just a bit angry or whatever. They've got to be right. They've got to be the superstar of the show. I don't really do hangouts. I shut my YouTube channel down because I didn't want to be an Eric Debay. I didn't want to engage in this stuff overly much. I do have something to contribute. And there's a lot of people with plenty to contribute. When you automatically shut other people down, you reject yourself. You reject someone, you reject yourself. You deny yourself. That's just the way that it goes. I'd advise people to be open and to check stuff out. The most important thing that we spoke about wasn't flat Earth, wasn't any of the other stuff. It was Sesti KV. It was what happened with the papacy, what happens with the law, what you're regarded as under the law, and what you should be doing to stand up to stop that from happening. Bleeding on from that is the education system, which caused the ignorance, which led to flat Earth and all of the other stuff. Flat Earth, of course, is the most important truth for everybody, but it's really not. Flat Earth sees people sitting in their fucking arses, watching videos every day. I really, really hope that people, get out there and actually make a difference. Learn not just about the flat Earth. The Bible says test all things. Well, you should probably start testing the law as well. The law is absolutely key to this. So that's me done. I'll say good night.
It's been a real pleasure. I know you've. I'm going to turn my camera on. I'm really sorry. This is going to be so unprofessional. So yeah, even though you've just said all of that about not doing shows and not wanting to be an Eric Debay, I'd really love to chat to you. So if you're willing, at the very least, if you'd come on and chat with me on my show as well, I'd be really, really pleased.
I'm happy to do a few. This is why I get out of flat Earth. I get out of it, and I decided that I was wasting my life. We do have a responsibility. I've tested firsthand. For me, I know where I am, and that's good enough for me. I understand that other people refuse to look, and I understand why they refuse to look. And it's only those who refuse to look who fail to see it. But for me, I was wasting my time. But we do have an obligation. Those who know have an obligation to educate other people. It's not okay for us to sit idly by and let others do that job. If that's what personal responsibility is about. And every single flat earther has to step up to the plate. There's a way to make a difference. You must help. You must engage. You must build content. You must get out there. You must speak to people. You must, it doesn't matter who you speak to. I don't care if you do write graffiti on the wall, write flat earth on local schools. I don't care what you do. All of these things will make a difference. And that's what people should be doing. The flat earth community needs to support each other better. People will argue and all of that other stuff. And people will have strong opinions about some things. But they do need to come together. But for me, I felt as if I was wasting my time, and that's why I got out. Right now, I'm starting to focus on my own business and stuff again. So I will make some time for some of this stuff. I've just started a Facebook group for Flat Earth. It's called Unite the Flat Earth. Come on, you flat earthers. So it's Unite the Flat Earth. Anyway, I'm not interested. I'm really not that bothered about membership. People can wander along if they like. I'm really based on Facebook. That's where I'll be building my own business stuff. I won't ever introduce my business. I'll never try to sell you something in the flat earth. I've got a business sellers page, and that's where I do my business. Try to see me trying to sell you a flat earth map, that way. But yeah, I'll have a conversation or whatever. I'll probably have another with Barbie at some point in the future.
We're very soon. We're gonna do this again soon, but I appreciate you giving your time, because you were saying about your channel, and because he had a channel and he kind of did away with it, but all along he's been involved. It's been like this gentle nudge for me, which is cool.
Well, I can echo that, Barbie. This has been a real pleasure for me. I've really enjoyed this. So thank you to you as well, Barbie, for inviting me along. So this has been a real unexpected surprise. He said it would be, and I'm really chuffed. So thank you, Stephen. It's been so nice chatting to you.
Stuff. I know that a lot of the stuff that I've got to say again needs a massive amount of exposition. it would take 3 or 4 hours to just talk about SDKV. You know, we're trying to. One of the very first questions was basically to define the flat Earth, and they're far too big. They're too big questions, and it's easy to get lost in those questions. So maybe for the next time we'll try and make it more constructive towards just single points, and then we can just kind of go through. You know, it was nice to get a big overview and just to kind of talk rubbish, you know, that way. I know that some people in the chat were a bit disgruntled for whatever reason. That's fine.
They'll live. They'll live. I mean,
some of these issues, some people just want to experience the fantasy element. There's a bit of sci-fi here. It's almost like watching Doctor Who being part of the flat Earth, and people want to come on and be dazzled by flat Earth stuff. And when somebody comes on and they start talking about SESTI, KV, and the papacy, and it's just like, yeah, it doesn't really relate. Some people just switch off because they still have got that child mentality where they can't sit down for more than 30 minutes and listen to an adult conversation.
Yeah, well put. That's it. This was an adult conversation, and I saw the people saying it in chat, and it's like, this was an exhilarating conversation as far as I'm concerned. Where they're like, oh, what's the point? It's like, well, weren't you paying attention? Hello.
Right, well, I'm going to shoot off again. It's 20 to 2 in the morning here. I've not had a cigarette for about 3 hours now.
You'll live. We'll get on for next week, yeah?
Yeah, no worries. Okay, nice to speak to you, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Bye, Stephen.
Bye-bye.
So, yeah, I'm going to, end this, guys. I know that it seemed like we were hitting so many veins, but there's so many veins to hit when you talk about the world that you live in. It's much more than flat or round or whatever you want to call it. There's a lot going on, guys, and this is what I want to do. I want people to be aware because we need to be aware. So let's give Stephen a thumbs up. He can explain shite that I cannot, even though we kind of think the same. And Nathan came on and was the regulator. Yay. But I appreciate everybody. Let me look at chat again really quick. Because who we got here? Vampire. I go drain vein. Okay, cool. Arwen is still here. Yvette is still here. Charlotte, what's up? Twitwit, hey, you're awesome. Jed, are we going to do that interview or no? I'm thinking next week, if you will do it with me still. If you will trust me to do that. Steve Anthony, hello. Phoebe, hey. Hello, Skeptic, hey. Space Lord, I'm not even sure who that is, but I appreciate everybody coming. You guys rock. Nathan, you got anything to say?
No, it's been a really good show. I mean, I think towards the end, your guest was getting quite tired because it's the same time here, obviously very late. But yeah, I really hope I get to chat to him again. I really do, because I'm sure you agree. It's a fascinating conversation. I'm just echoing what I said earlier, basically, which was that I really enjoyed that conversation. You know, it's a lot of the conversations that you have with people are fascinating when you're a flat earther, and he's no exception. So yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I mean, I knew that you would enjoy it, and he has a really great outlook on stuff. It's not all about the bad things, guys. It's about good things. You know, we were working our way to that. So I'm going to have him on again, and I hope you guys will take the time to come back. But I'm going to end this. Leave your comments below. Tell me what you thought of the Hangout.
Subscribe to Barbie McGill if you're not subscribed already.
Yes. Sub me if you're not. Like or dislike this. You know you have a choice. Most importantly, you guys rock. Have Have a good night. Bye.